The elevator door slid shut, sealing me in a steel cage with the man who could ruin me with a single glance. My heart pounded louder than the hum of the machine as I stood beside James Park, the CEO of Park Global Enterprises, whose cold reputation preceded him like a winter storm. I, Elias Nguyen, was just his secretary and nobody in his glittering Manhattan empire, yet every day I felt the weight of his gaze like a secret I wasn't supposed to know. It was my 3rd month working for James, and I still hadn't cracked the code to his silence. He was Korean-American, mid-30s, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that could freeze a room. People called him the Ice King, untouchable behind his tailored suits and curt commands. I'd seen executives crumble under his stare, their egos reduced to ash. But me, I was invisible until the night everything changed. The office was a ghost town, the city lights bleeding through the windows of the 52nd floor. I was organizing James's schedule, my fingers trembling over my tablet as I tried not to mess up. He'd been in a mood all day, snapping at everyone, and I was determined to stay out of his crosshairs. Then, out of nowhere, he spoke. "Elias," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. I froze, my pen hovering over a post-it note. He never used my first name. "Why do you always look like you're about to run?" I blinked, my throat dry. Don't. "Sir," I stammered, pushing my glasses up my nose. My face burned. I was 25, perpetually awkward, and had spent my life fading into the background, growing up in a small Vietnamese-American community in Queens. I'd learned to keep my head down, especially about who I was. Being gay wasn't something you shouted about where I came from. And here, in James's world, I was just the shy kid who kept his coffee hot and his meetings on time. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over my desk. "You're lying," he said, his tone softer than I'd ever heard. "You're always hiding." His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I swore I saw something flicker in them, something human, something raw. My pulse raced. This wasn't the Ice King. This was someone else entirely. I mumbled an apology, scrambling to gather my things. But his hand caught my wrist. Not hard, but firm enough to stop me cold. "Stay?" he said, and the word felt like a command and a plea all at once. "You're the reason I can't focus." My breath hitched. The air between us crackled, like a storm about to break. I wanted to ask what he meant, but my voice was gone, stolen by the weight of his confession. James Park, the man who owned half of Manhattan's skyline, was looking at me like I was the only thing in his world. And I, Elias Nguyen, the shy secretary who'd never dared to dream, was falling for him right there in the silence. The next week was torture. Every glance, every brush of his hand as he passed me a file, felt like a spark threatening to ignite something I couldn't control. I tried to focus on my work, scheduling his meetings with soul investors, managing his emails, keeping his life in order, but my mind kept replaying his words. "You're the reason I can't focus." What did that even mean? Was it a confession? A mistake? I was too scared to ask, too afraid to hope. James didn't mention it again, but something had shifted. He started lingering at my desk, asking questions he didn't need answers to. "Elias, do you like jazz?" He'd ask out of nowhere. Or, "Have you ever been to Seoul?" I'd mumble half answers, my cheeks burning, while he watched me with that unreadable intensity. It was maddening. I was drowning in him, and he didn't even know it. One evening, as rain lashed against the office windows, he called me into his office. "Elias, I need you to stay late," he said, not looking up from his laptop. My heart sank. I'd been hoping to slip out early, to hide from the feelings I couldn't name. But I nodded, grabbing my notepad like a shield. We worked in silence, The only sound the patter of rain and the click of his keyboard. Then, out of nowhere, he closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. "Why don't you ever talk about yourself?" he asked, his voice cutting through the quiet. I fidgeted with my pen. "There's not much to say, sir." "Bullshit," he said, and I flinched at the edge in his tone. He stood, circling his desk to stand in front of me. "You're not just a secretary, Elias. You." He gestured vaguely, like he was frustrated with words themselves. "You think I don't notice you? The way you hum when you think no one's listening. The way you fix my tie without me asking." My face was on fire. I wanted to disappear, but his gaze pinned me in place. "I'm just doing my job," I whispered. "No," he said, stepping closer. "You're doing more than that. And I'm tired of pretending I don't see it." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed, shattering the moment. He glanced at it, his jaw tightening. "It's my father," he muttered. And just like that, the Ice King was back. He answered in rapid Korean, his voice clipped, his face a mask. I slipped out of the room, my heart pounding, wondering what the hell I'd gotten myself into. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my tiny Queens apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment. James wasn't just my boss, she was a man carrying a weight I couldn't see. I'd overheard enough to know his father, a tycoon in Seoul, controlled him like a puppet, dictating his every move. Was that why he was so cold? Was that why he'd let his guard down with me? The next day, I walked into the office to find a crisis. A major deal with a Seoul-based tech firm was falling apart, and James was a storm of frustration. "Elias, get me the files on the Kwon merger," he barked, not looking at me. I scrambled to comply, but as I handed him the folder, our fingers brushed, and he froze. For a split second, his eyes softened, and I saw the man from last night, the one who'd almost let me in. The rest of the day was chaos. Meetings, shouting matches, and a flurry of emails kept me running. By 9 p.m., the office was empty again, just me and James. I was exhausted, but I couldn't leave him alone. Not when he looked like he was carrying the weight of the world. "Elias," he said suddenly, his voice hoarse. He was standing by the window, staring at the city below. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" I hesitated, then nodded. "All the time," I admitted. Growing up, I'd hidden who I was to survive. Even now, I was hiding from myself, from the feelings I had for him. He turned to face me, his expression raw. "I'm supposed to be this perfect son, perfect CEO. But I'm not. I'm just," he trailed off, running a hand through his hair. "I'm just a man who's falling for his secretary, and I don't know how to stop." My heart stopped. The world tilted. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. All I could do was step closer, close enough to feel the heat of him, to see the fear and longing in his eyes. And then, without thinking, I kissed him. The kiss was a collision of everything we'd been holding back, tentative at first, then desperate, like we were stealing time from the universe. James's hands found my waist, pulling me closer, and for a moment, the world outside his office ceased to exist. But just as quickly, he pulled back, his breath ragged, his eyes wide with something like panic. "Elias, we can't," he said, stepping away, his voice breaking. This isn't right." I felt like I'd been slapped. My lips still burned from his touch, but his words were a bucket of ice water. "Why not?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You just said." "I know what I said," he snapped, running a hand over his face. "But you don't understand. My life isn't my own. My father, the board, The company. They'd destroy us. I stood there, frozen, my heart splintering. I'd spent my life hiding, but kissing him had felt like the first honest thing I'd ever done. And now he was taking it back. So what? I said, surprising myself with the edge in my voice. You're just going to pretend this didn't happen. James looked at me, his expression torn. I don't want to, he whispered. But I have to protect you. Protect me. I laughed bitterly. I'm not some fragile thing. James, I've survived worse than you can imagine. Growing up, I'd faced whispers and worse for being different. I'd learned to be invisible. But with him, I wanted to be seen. He shook his head, turning back to the window. You don't know what they're capable of, he said, his voice barely audible. My father, he'd ruin you to get to me. The weight of his words hit me like a punch. I wanted to argue, to fight for whatever this was. But the fear in his eyes stopped me. I left his office without another word, my chest aching with the weight of what we'd almost had. The next few weeks were a tightrope walk. James and I fell into a painful routine, professional, distant, but charged with unspoken tension. Every time our eyes met, I saw the man who'd kissed me back, but he was buried under the Ice King's armor. I threw myself into work, trying to forget the taste of him, but it was impossible. He was everywhere in the files I organized, the coffee I poured, the late nights we spent in silence. Then came the gala. Park Global Enterprises was hosting its annual charity event at a glittering Manhattan hotel. And as James's secretary, I was expected to attend. I dreaded it. Schmoozing with billionaires wasn't my thing. And the idea of being near James in a room full of people made my stomach churn. I wore a borrowed suit, feeling like an imposter among the sequins and tuxedos. James was the center of attention, as always, shaking hands and flashing his practiced smile. But I caught him watching me, his gaze lingering longer than it should. When he approached me at the bar, my heart leapt into my throat. You clean up well, he said, his voice low, a ghost of a smile on his lips. I flushed, tugging at my tie. Thanks, I mumbled. You too. He leaned closer, his breath warm against my ear. I'm sorry, Elias, he whispered. Acquisitions. But all I could think about was you. My breath caught. Before I could respond, a woman in a red dress interrupted, pulling James into a conversation about stocks or something equally dull. I slipped away, my heart racing, wondering how much longer I could survive this push and pull. Later that night, I found myself on the hotel's rooftop garden, needing air. The city sparkled below, a sea of lights that felt both infinite and suffocating. I didn't hear James approach until he was beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. I can't keep doing this, he said, his voice raw, pretending I don't feel what I feel. Then don't, I said, turning to face him. Stop running, James. For once. Just be honest. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and then he kissed me again. This time, there was no hesitation, no pulling back. It was fierce, desperate, like he was pouring every unspoken word into it. When we finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine, his breath shaky. I'm scared, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. But I'm more scared of losing you. The next morning, reality crashed back in. I arrived at the office to find a stack of tabloids on my desk, courtesy of an overzealous coworker. The headline screamed, Park Air spotted an intimate moment at gala. The grainy photo showed James and me on the rooftop, our silhouettes unmistakable. My stomach dropped. This was bad. Really bad. James was already in his office, pacing like a caged animal. Elias, he said when he saw me, his voice tight. I'm handling this. Stay out of it. Stay out of it. I snapped, my fear boiling into anger. This is my life too. James, you don't get to decide for me. He stopped pacing, his shoulders slumping. I know, he said quietly. I don't know how to fix this. Before I could respond, his phone rang again. Another call from his father. I watched as he answered, his face hardening, his voice clipped. When he hung up, he looked at me with something like despair. He's coming to New York, he said. He knows. The rest of the day was a blur. I tried to focus on work, but the tabloids were everywhere, spreading like wildfire. By noon, my phone was buzzing with messages from friends, family, even strangers. My mom called, her voice trembling. Elias, what's going on? Are you okay? I didn't know how to answer. I wasn't okay. I was terrified, exhilarated, and heartbroken all at once. I'd spent my life hiding who I was, and now the world knew before I was ready. But worse than that was the fear in James's eyes, the knowledge that his father's arrival could destroy everything. That night, James asked me to meet him at his apartment, a sleek penthouse overlooking Central Park. I'd never been there before, and stepping into his world felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. He was waiting for me in the living room, a glass of whiskey in his hand. His tie loosened. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I dragged you into this mess. You didn't drag me anywhere, I said, stepping closer. I chose this. I chose you. He looked at me, his eyes glistening. You don't know what you're signing up for. Elias, my father, he'll make your life hell. Then let him try, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm done hiding. James, are you? For the first time, I saw him smile a real, unguarded smile. You're braver than I am, he said, pulling me into his arms. And as we stood there, the city humming below us, I knew we were on the edge of something bigger than either of us could control. Mr. Park arrived like a storm cloud over Manhattan. I'd never met him, but his presence loomed over the office the moment his private jet touched down. James was a wreck, though he hid it behind his usual icy facade. I could see it in the way his hands shook as he signed documents, the way his eyes darted to me when he thought I wasn't looking. We hadn't spoken about the tabloids since that night in his apartment, but the weight of them hung between us like a guillotine. Mr. Park summoned us to a boardroom on the top floor, a glass-walled fortress that felt more like a courtroom. He was an older version of James' same sharp features, same commanding presence, but with none of his son's warmth. His eyes raked over me, cold and calculating, as if I were a bug he could crush under his heel. Elias and Gwen, he said, my name sounding like an accusation. You're the one causing all this trouble. I swallowed hard, my palms sweaty. James stepped forward, his voice steady but laced with steel. This isn't about Elias, he said. It's about me. Mr. Park's laugh was a blade. You think this is about you? This is about the company, Jehun, the family, our legacy, and you're throwing it away for him. He gestured at me, his lip curling. I wanted to shrink, to disappear like I always had, but something in me snapped. I'm not a mistake, I said, my voice shaking but clear. And neither is what we feel. The room went silent. James looked at me, his eyes wide with something like awe. Mr. Park's face darkened, but before he could speak, James grabbed my hand, his grip firm. He's right, he said. I'm done pretending to be someone I'm not. Mr. Park's fury was palpable, but he didn't shout. He didn't need to. You'll regret this, he said, his voice low and venomous. Both of you. The fallout was swift. By the next morning, the board was in an uproar, and whispers of James's scandal echoed through the office. I was called into HR, where a stern woman handed me a severance package and a non-disclosure agreement. "It's for the best," she said, not meeting my eyes. I refused to sign. I wasn't going to let them erase me. But walking out of that office, I felt like I was leaving a piece of myself behind. James found me in the lobby, his face pale. "Elias, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I never wanted this for you." "Then fight for me," I said, my eyes burning with tears. "Fight for us." He nodded, pulling me into a fierce hug. "I will," he promised. "I swear." That night, James took me to a small jazz club in Harlem, a place where no one knew his name. We sat in a dark corner, listening to a saxophonist pour his soul into every note. James held my hand under the table, his thumb tracing circles on my skin. "I've spent my life doing what I'm told," he said softly. "But you make me want to be free." I leaned my head on his shoulder, my heart full and aching. "You already are," I whispered. "You just have to believe it." But freedom came at a cost. The next day, James was summoned to Seoul. His father had pulled strings, threatening to strip him of his position if he didn't comply. I wanted to go with him, but he refused. "This is my fight," he said, kissing my forehead. "Stay safe. I'll be back." Watching him board that plane was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I spent the next week in a haze, fielding calls from reporters, dodging questions from my family. My mom came Martha. I found an old photo of us at a pride parade, both of us laughing, free in a way I hadn't been in years. It reminded me of what James and I could have if we were brave enough. James was gone for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of silence, of checking my phone obsessively, of wondering if I'd lost him for good. I threw myself into job hunting, but every interview felt hollow. I didn't want to start over. I wanted him. Then, one rainy evening, he showed up at my apartment, soaked to the bone, his eyes bright with something I hadn't seen before: hope. "I told him no," he said, his voice trembling. "I told my father I'm done living his life. I'm out. Elias. I'm out of the company, out of his control." I stared at him, my heart pounding. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means I'm free," he said, stepping closer. "And I'm yours, if you'll have me." I threw my arms around him, tears mixing with the rain on my face. "I've always been yours," I said, and we kissed like it was the first time, like the world was ours to rewrite. We moved to a small town upstate, far from the city's glare. James started a consulting firm, small but his own. I found work as a librarian, surrounded by books and quiet, a life that fit me better than any skyscraper ever could. The tabloids moved on, and the world forgot us. But we didn't forget each other. One evening, as we sat on our porch watching the sunset, James took my hand. "You're the reason I'm here," he said, his voice soft. "You're the reason I'm free." I smiled, squeezing his hand. "And you're the reason I'm not afraid anymore." We weren't perfect. We fought. We cried. We healed. But every night, we fell asleep in each other's arms. 2 men who'd found love in a world that tried to tear it apart. And that was enough.